Hello there, so you know the basic ranking process already. Maps are promoted to the qualified section by beatmap nominators, then after 7 days they're transferred to the ranked section as additions to the game's official content. I've gone over the origin and changes to the qualified section in detail already, but at the same time, I've only glossed over what's most vital to understanding the qualified section's real purpose: disqualification. Maps are qualified for exposure. Qualified maps are seen by more eyes than the vast majority of pending maps, which can often shed light on any issues overlooked by modders and beatmap nominators. If problems are revealed during a map's 7-day qualification period, it's disqualified to give its mapper a chance to fix those problems. Sounds like a system with only benefits, but really, is anything in mapping that simple? Disqualification has always been a contentious topic among mappers. Just about everything in mapping can be boiled down to subjective choices, meaning a problem to some people may be perfectly acceptable to others. If you look at map threads from a few years ago, you can easily see heated reactions to disqualifications coming from mappers and players who disagreed with any proposed subjective problems. Nowadays, however, these kinds of threads are relatively rare. Heated discussion about subjective mapping issues still exist, of course, but disqualifications aren't antagonized even close to the same degree as they were in the past. So, what has changed about disqualification over the course of these last few years to cause such a shift in reaction? And what about those changes could have possibly affected mapping? To answer that, let's look back into the history of OSU, starting from a point which you should be familiar with by now: the split of the BAT into the BAT and the QAT in August 2014. Last time I talked about this, I focused entirely on that first group, but to examine disqualifications, we're gonna need to look at the other side of the story: the initial role of the QAT. For those of you who may not recall everything from these two videos, which I'd really suggest watching before this one, the split between the BAT and the QAT was essentially one of the biggest changes the ranking process has seen so far. Previously, the BAT was an exclusive group consisting of cherry-picked members chosen to promote maps to ranked status. But as OSU and the mapping scene expanded, the decision was made to open the group up to those more representative of average community members. The BAT became a conglomeration of active modders no longer attached to moderation roles previously associated with the BAT, further separated with the name change to BN a bit later. The QAT, full name Quality Assurance Team, was a group with a new purpose though: assuring the quality of content promoted by new beatmap nominators who, without being hand-chosen, may not have a solid grasp on what's worthy of rank. The QAT's main duty at first was simple. Its members would check through qualified maps during their 7-day wait period, but more in-depth than the hundreds of players passively enjoying the potentially new ranked maps. If someone on the team found a map breaking the ranking criteria or lacking sufficient quality, they would discuss its problems among other QAT members and determine whether or not they were serious enough to warrant a disqualification. In the cases that were severe enough, one member would make a post on the map's thread detailing the specific reason for the DQ, along with other beneficial advice under the label of additional modding. All disqualifications were then documented in a spreadsheet, which included the bats who nominated each respective map and how serious their disqualification reasons were. So, DQs, even from the start, were done with good intentions. They prevented maps with agreed upon issues from reaching rank, while also guiding mappers in the right direction with additional modding. Both of these combined helped explain the QAT's expected level of quality, the quality that was meant to dominate the ranked section. As should have been expected though, not everyone viewed it from such an optimistic lens. To a lot of people, the introduction of the QAT appeared to be only a negative one. They were the purely evil force forbidding maps from passing the 7-day qualification period, enforcing some subjective level of quality that mappers didn't always find reasonable. Before the QAT began taking action, disqualifications did still exist, but they weren't nearly as common. Actually, even before the qualified section was created, there was a 7-day period for each newly ranked map to get unranked by a BAT, even for subjective issues, though, again, the frequency of DQs and the new group in charge of them was what caused concern. People felt this more strict way of assuring quality was unnecessary. And so, the QAT was loathed. They were taking maps down left and right, angering mappers who disagreed with issues, leaning towards the more subjective side of quality. Meanwhile, players despised disqualifications for removing any already earned scores, since unlike now, qualified maps used to reward performance points. Despite their good intentions, the QAT QAT and their DQs were viewed almost entirely as a negative force in the ranking process, and that viewpoint was only enhanced with the introduction of beatmap nominator ranking. In case you didn't remember, beatmap nominator ranking was part of the ideal automated ranking process heavily pushed for after the split of the BAT. It let nominators earn points for how often they modded and nominated maps, but more importantly for the topic at hand, it penalized nominators for promoting maps which later received disqualifications. This was the same information already being logged on that previous spreadsheet, but now with more punishment involved for screwing up any amount. That being said, beatmap nominators felt much more pressured by the QAT to promote maps which wouldn't risk disqualification, and therefore a loss of points. Nominators prioritized safe, simplistic maps over anything potentially controversial, since that was a surefire way to perform well. In any cases that weren't 100% safe, nominators would ask members of the QAT whether or not a part of a map was acceptable, overloading the group with work that caused a few problems later down the line. We'll get there soon. Beatmap nominator ranking was unfortunately discontinued only 5 months after it began, which should have turned this into a non-issue, but the stigma against disqualifications from nominators still held strong. Even though DQs were no longer a threat to their points, they nevertheless made beatmap nominators feel as if they'd failed at their job. Even now, over 2 years later when my nominations are disqualified for the simplest of mistakes, I feel uncomfortable because it reminds me of the heart attacks I would have upon seeing my own disqualifications during the beatmap nominator ranking era. It's like PTSD in a sense. BN PTSD. But yeah, getting back on topic, disqualifications didn't exactly earn the QAT the best of reputations. Along with the complaints about subjective mapping standards and PP losses, users often complained about disqualifications occurring on a map's 7th day in the qualified section, and the times maps were disqualified twice for previously overlooked issues. These caused delays that seemed unnecessary from the public's viewpoint, but there was a pretty clear reason for why they happened. The QAT was just a group of human beings, but they were expected to uphold inhuman work schedules and impractical levels of efficiency. What's worse is how some complaints even led to singling out individuals in the QAT because of their disqualification posts. For example, this is a map of Dragon Force's The Last Journey Home, famous for housing Osu's first 600 PP score. The play currently at the top of its leaderboards worth 608 PP total is not actually that score. The real first 600 PP score was earned while the map was qualified, and it didn't last long. 1 day before reaching rank, the map was disqualified a second time by Garvin, a QAT member at the time. The reason? We need to disqualify your map due to the massive slowdown slider, trying to make the transition more natural as it is very abrupt as it stands. That slowdown slider being this, whose loopy bit was added to make the transition more natural and avoid breaks in combo. It used to look a bit simpler like this. Whether or not I agree with the reason is unimportant here. What matters is how people reacted to it. With a world record PP player removed due to just one slider, players took their rage out on the source of the disqualification, Garvin. They claimed that this QAT member, not having even earned a 100 PP score, should not have been judging a playability issue on a 6-star map. While it publicly looked like Garvin was the one taking the map down for a supposedly personal reason, this viewpoint ignored that the QAT worked as, a team. It wasn't just his decision to disqualify the map, yet it was mostly treated as such. The Last Journey Home wasn't the only instance of this either. More and more, those making disqualification posts were being attacked on a personal level, and the only way to stop this was to change how disqualification posts were designed. DQs began to be written with a template, emphasizing how the choice to take down a map was that of the whole quality assurance team rather than an individual. Personal criticisms still continued though, which ultimately forced the QAT to disqualify maps anonymously under the guise of the general QAT. As anyone around at the time knows, this had a rough start. It was meant to be a nameless form of posting for QAT members, suggesting that disqualifications were decided by a group rather than a guy making a post, but something wasn't quite right. Of course, its problems were fixed as soon as higher-ups caught wind of them, after which the fun was over. Disqualifications under the QAT alias for its 2 months of runtime appeared to be more of an actual quality assurance system than its previous group of human beings working to improve maps. That old additional modding and DQ posts had been weeded out a few weeks before the general QAT's initiation, meaning maps were disqualified with only unrankable issues mentioned. Those issues were also robotically categorized at the bottom of each post, with different letters correlating to different disqualification reasons. The actual information in general QAT disqualifications was essentially the same as that from previous DQs, but their presentation gave off a new vibe to mappers. The anonymous QAT was an unstoppable authority, and the only way to deny its claims of mapping issues was by contesting disqualifications through a written form, which was only successful on one occasion. If disqualification reasons were ignored by a mapper, the general QAT would just reiterate itself in yet another DQ, flat out rejecting certain maps from reaching ranked status. And, well, that was the point. To assure quality by all means, rejecting unsuitable maps from being promoted as official content. The QAT alias was doing exactly what it set out to do with disqualifications, but with more efficiency than ever before. And that efficiency also ended up completely changing the course of disqualifications when met with community disapproval. While it may have shifted the blame away from individuals, the QAT's anonymization dropped its reputation among mappers to an all-time low. DQs grew more common, and the QAT appeared less open to cooperation and understanding of a mapper's viewpoint. They simply enforced quality standards as they saw fit, which, despite being perfect for their job, was not well received. Remember what I said earlier about mapping threads being full of heated reactions to disqualifications? The QAT alias era was the peak of this mapper and player outrage, which may have been even worsened by the fact that no single person was to blame, but rather a vague authority figure. With one of these threads headed out of control beyond the scope of previous ones, higher-ups felt inclined to completely change the face of disqualification. While disqualifications were always supposed to be a good thing in some capacity, new changes made it so that was as obvious as possible. The first set of actions involved removing PP from qualified maps, alleviating complaints from players upon a map's disqualification. We've talked about this before and everyone already knows this, so we don't need to go over it again. What I ignored in that other video, however, was how changes at this time alleviated complaints from mappers. The QAT anonymization was put to rest, and after a full year of performing one main task, the QAT no longer checked each and every qualified map for issues. Its members were told to act on the desires of the mapping community, rather than their own shared view of quality. The QAT then expanded to have roles unrelated to disqualification, but that's a story for another time. And so, drama caused by disqualification began to disappear. With the QAT not examining every entry to the qualified section, it was now up to the community to report problematic maps. What started as an unofficial thread for beatmap nominators reporting qualified maps turned into the main source of disqualifications. Starting mid-2016, anyone could post concerns on the threads of qualified maps, and report them to the QAT via this new public thread or a direct private message. Disqualification backlash was severely reduced because quality control was severely reduced. All mappers and players were now responsible for maintaining map quality, not just a select group of people under the name Quality Assurance. These guys began to disqualify maps according to community decisions rather than their own, and this is a system still being used for the final step in the ranking process today. So yeah, this way of handling disqualifications may be more satisfying for mappers and may reduce hate towards the QAT, but I can't say it has only upsides. There's a matter of some low quality maps getting through, but that's not all. As someone learning to map at the start of the BAT split, disqualifications were some of the most useful tools I could access to understand the quality standards mappers adhered to. Seeing all the different disqualification reasons, as well as additional advice from these community members chosen for their mapping and modding knowledge, was like a goldmine for a developing mapper. I even spent some of my time documenting disqualification reasons, which had a huge impact on how I learned to map. Without a group dedicated to checking qualified maps now though, mapping quality standards lack their past clarity. Mappers understood what was okay and what was not based on how the QAT acted, yet now there's no guiding force. Only maps which are drastically below ranking standards or those which clearly break the ranking criteria are disqualified in the current system because they're the only ones receiving community attention. Tons of other cases on the line between good and bad go by the wayside because nobody cares to give them a look during qualification. Whether all these changes over time have been good or not depends entirely on how you view mapping. If you believe mappers should be allowed to promote any maps without so much concern over quality, then this system is perfect. If you value stricter standards or a clear understanding of what maps are of acceptable quality, however, the older system might have been to your liking. Both ways of disqualification have their undeniable flaws, but as a game designed around catering to its vast user base, I can only expect that the system more satisfying to players and mappers will continue to triumph. But hey, things in the ranking process always change, so there's no saying for sure. Anyway, thanks to these guys for supporting this video, and I'll see you next week.